So in this second part of chapter 2, where we talk about operations strategy, we're going to focus on understanding the role that the 10 decision areas of OM has in supporting an organization's corporate strategy. What it is that how you configure those 10 decision areas of OM actually helps you to clarify what your operations strategy is. In fact, depending on the performance objectives that the operations system has to deliver, that is what will determine how you configure, you structure your operations infrastructure. But remember that the expectations of the operations infrastructure is really determined by the corporate strategy of the organization, what the organization wants to achieve. If the organization determines that it wants to emphasize a performance advantage based on differentiation, now the operations system infrastructure must respond. If it decides that it wants to focus on cost, then the operation system must also respond. And then, of course, if it's going to focus on response, then the operations architecture has to conform. All right? So we're going to try to understand a bit better the role that the operations infrastructure plays in supporting the corporate strategy. So in this section, we will focus on identifying the 10 decision areas of OM or operations management. We want to understand the significance of what we call key success factors and core competencies, which really speaks to the kind of capabilities the organization needs to have in its operating infrastructure. One of the things that Sony, for example, is well known for is really being able to develop products that are very small, that are quite impactful and very reliable, right? So they have this, and you know that if it's a Sony product, that it's of good quality. And so that has been developed by ensuring that Sony has capabilities in its operating infrastructure that allows it to be able to offer the variety of electronic products that are of the highest caliber. All right? So, and then of course we want to explain these 4 global strategy options that we talked about in the last section. So, achieving a performance advantage for operations, just to give you a sense of where the focus ought to be. So if you look at this particular diagram over here, we have these are the 10 decision areas of OM, all right? So 10 and here essentially this section is the performance objective that we're looking for. If you're looking for differentiation, if you're looking for cost leadership, if you're looking for response. Now, there's an important question. Can you actually try to pursue all of them at the same time? It is not easy to actually pursue all of these at the same time. You could have an organization that have multiple strategic business units, but then one aspect of the business focuses on differentiation, another aspect has a focus on response, another aspect could be focused on cost. So sometimes what you would find is that companies will produce low-cost brands, but then they rebrand them under a different name, and so it's not uncommon, like store brands and so on, where they try to offer a slightly different price from the well-known brands and so on. So that could be like a part of the strategy around cost leadership. So those 10 decision areas of OM, as we say, contribute to each of those. So if we're talking about differentiation, so product design becomes quite critical, because you want to design unique products that create an experience for your consumers, right? At the same time, If you're focusing on response, then things like your location, your layout, your scheduling, all of those things can impact your ability to respond very quickly. All right, and so we have some examples of different companies. One of the things I would love to have, if we did have it, would be examples of not-for-profit organizations or small to medium-sized enterprises. And so that's one of the areas that I intend to work on, because our textbook, unfortunately, tends to focus on these large organizations. We need an OM textbook that equally emphasizes SMEs and not-for-profits, and not just only large corporations like Hewlett and Packard and so forth, right? So by leveraging your 10 decision areas of OM and focusing identifying which of those levers are critical, and then focusing them in a way that you get the kind of impact that you're looking for, either differentiation, cost leadership, or response, will ultimately help you achieve this performance advantage, right? And remember, if we say performance advantage, it could apply to both competing organizations and non-competing organizations. Okay? So the 10 decision areas of OM, we've already identified those: goods and service design, quality, process and capacity design, location and selection, your layout design, human resources, and job design, supply chain management, inventory management, scheduling, and maintenance. So these are our key areas. So let's see how those actually apply to the production of goods and the production of services. So with goods and service design, so product is usually tangible, and essentially you have to design a tangible product. So there are ways in which we approach the design of tangible products. The product is not tangible, which is a service. So it's not tangible. It's a new range of product attributes. So what it is that you have features that you provide. You have an experience that you try to provide. Albeit that sometimes as part of a service, there may be a product component to it, but then the emphasis is on the experience that the customer receives. So if you were to go to Walt Disney, there are all kinds of products that are involved in the creation of services that create a pleasurable experience for you. But what you're focusing on is really the design of the service, and the products that you use in that design just so happens to be what is needed to create the experience that you want. Quality. So in terms of goods, there are many objective quality standards, such as battery life, which is an important thing for cell phones these days. And then in terms of quality for services, we tend to focus on more qualitative attributes: the color, the feel, the smell, the general look and aesthetics, and so forth. All right, location selection. Sometimes you may need to be near customers, you may need to be near the raw materials or your suppliers, and so on. So it all depends. If you are running a pharmaceutical company, you got to be near customers. And then, of course, you won't say, well, guess what? I'm going to locate near my suppliers. So you have a company that's supplying you with your medicines, but the company will typically be in some industrial zone. Nobody's going to go there to purchase pharmaceuticals. You have to be very close to the customers, and sometimes customers need medication in under emergency situations. So therefore, you have to be closer to your customers. All right. Your layout design, in terms of a product, sometimes the process of manufacturing the product will have implications for how the facility is laid out. In terms of services, sometimes the actual flow of activities will also dictate that, but also to the kind of experience that you want to create for customers will have implications for how you lay out that particular facility. All right. So we could go through the rest of those and see how these 10 decision areas of OM are sort of like tweaked, whether we're talking about a service or we're talking about a product. So you could see in the case of human resources that when creating a product, there might be an emphasis on certain types of technical skills, but then in terms of service environment, that people-to-people connection is extremely critical. And so one needs to be able to understand customers, interact with them, sense their needs, and then, adapt your sort of service delivery to suit that. Supply chain management for products and services, again, can be different. In terms of services, most services, you have to inventory the products that go into creating the service. In terms of products, you will inventory raw materials, and you could also inventory the final product, which is a tangible good as well, right? Scheduling, has to do with the order in which things are done. Often you have work that needs to be done, or you're producing products of a number of types, and you have to figure out what is the best sequence of which to produce those, so that way it allows you to maximize the efficiency of operations. But also too, in scheduling, you may want to look at how you schedule work so you maximize productivity, you balance your workloads. In the plant, you don't have one period where there's a lot of work being done, another period with almost no work being done, right? And then of course scheduling, in service environments, we often focus heavily on scheduling of staff members, making sure that there's sufficient staff to service customers during particular peak periods. So for example, in a bank, if you were to examine when are the peak periods, certainly there are peak periods around lunchtime. There are also peak periods towards the end of a month, and so therefore the bank would need to optimize its capacity, schedule workers, schedule the number of tellers at any one point in time, depending on when the peak periods are during the day, during the week, or during the month. Okay? And of course, maintenance of equipment is extremely important if you want to have the reliability of production. So preventive maintenance is often the way you want to work, because if you're talking about airlines, for example, you definitely want to have preventive maintenance. In some cases, yes, something will break down and you will repair it, but the general thrust has to be on preventive maintenance. Excuse me. In terms of our global service operations now, typically, when you think about managing services in a global context, you would have to understand what your capacity needs are. You would need to know where you're going to locate your facilities, depending on where there are opportunities for growth, for market demand, how you design and lay out the facilities to create a particular service delivery offering or certain service experience, and of course you have to engage in scheduling workers, right? So some issues that exist in the area of operations strategy is to look at your operation strategy based on the kind of resources that you will require to support the performance objectives of the organization. All right. So when we say take a resources view, financial resources, production resources, technology resources, human resources, all of these are important in supporting your operation strategy. Value chain analysis allows you to be able to understand the various components that are involved in taking raw materials and then transforming those raw materials to finished products for sale or for consumption or services as well. So the value chain really is the chain of activities that you undergo. And it's often important to do an analysis of your value chain so that you could identify weaknesses, strengthen them so that you could deliver on the quality or the performance that you're looking for, the speed performance, the experience, or whatever it is that you are promising your customers. You need to be able to have a value chain that can deliver that value in the best possible manner. Porter's five forces allows you to look at the forces that impact your organization's competitiveness if you are in a competing environment. So in that case, you want to understand the forces such as buyers, the forces of the consumers, suppliers. All of these individuals have a certain amount of power in the relationship, and depending on how that power is configured, your strategy needs to take that into consideration. Operation strategy also have to be configured in an environment where there's constant change, and of course that there are many external factors. When it comes to the production of products, they're products, particularly if you look at them from the time that they're created to maturity, at different stages of a product life cycle. So products tend to have a life cycle, which means that they're created, there's a growth period, then there's a mature state, and then the product actually goes into decline. Not all products, but a number of products do that. So, for example, at one point in time, floppy disks, that was a revolutionary technology. Then it got to a point when compact discs or CDs were introduced, and those CDs now eventually forced the floppy disk into a mature state and eventually decline. So there are these four stages that we tend to consider when we're speaking about a product life cycle. The first stage is really that you introduce the product, and when you introduce that product, that usually if that product is new on the market, you are still trying to understand what customers' needs are. You might be making changes in the design, so there are implications for design. It's hard to forecast what the demand is going to be because people haven't really gotten to know the product yet. So things like marketing becomes very important. So you could see, if you are focusing on your operation strategy, these are the areas you tend to focus on in the early stages of a product launch. You want to look at the design. You want to look at making design changes, because as you get feedback from customers, you're going to want to make changes. You want to do short production runs. You don't want long production runs yet, because long production runs imply that your design is stable. And so now you want to focus on efficiency and lowering cost. But at this point, since you might be making many changes, you want to do shorter production runs, so you don't incur a situation where you produce a large volume of products that are not selling, in which case it becomes obsolete pretty quickly. So there will be high production costs because you don't get economies of scale. And then, of course, you would have to have a limited number of models until you see how consumers are reacting to your product. In the second stage, where now if the product is now starting to stabilize, then you're starting to see growth. Then this is where forecasting, product and process sort of reliability is what you want to get. So you're focusing less on your product design, but you're now focusing more on your process design and making sure your process is stable and reliable and can produce the product, with consistent quality. All right. You might make a couple of improvements based on what's happening in your market space. If people are coming up with copycat products, or they are trying to compete with you by offering an alternative, you may very well have to stay ahead of the competition by offering some additional features. So redesigning your products can certainly help with that. Increasing your capacity, because now you're going for a growth phase, so now you're going to have to worry about How do you do your capacity increases? Do you start to outsource, or do you say, let me build additional capacity? There's always a risk in building additional capacity because at some point your product may become mature and may even go into decline, in which case you're going to have to figure out what do you do with this excess capacity. So the trade-off between controlling your capacity growth versus outsourcing, you would have to consider what's the best course of action, particularly if there's a high risk of a new innovative product making your product obsolete. All right. So you focus on increasing your capacity, shifting towards product focus by making sure that you have a production process that takes into consideration the particularities of your product. And then when you get to the mature stage where there's not a lot of growth happening here, this is where you start looking at things like standardization. Standardization will help you to get economies of scale, operate with larger volumes, lower your costs, and so on. You could get into, you're not making a lot of product changes at that time. You are optimizing your capacity. You are increasing the stability of your process. You want long production runs to get economies of scale. And then you focus on improving your product to cut the cost of production, not so much to now offer something brand new to your customers. All right. And last but not least, in decline, what do we do when our product is actually in decline? So the sales is going down. So as you could see, a very good example is the Boeing 747. You hear a lot about Boeing 787. There's the 737 MAX, the 757. Well, there's a new one that I believe that might be on the market, but certainly 757 have been around for a while, and those planes were kind of either in the mature stage or in the decline stage. But Boeing has sort of made some improvements. The 737 was also around for a while, but it came up with the 737 MAX 8, which was sort of a updated version. So one of the things that you can do when your product is either in the mature stage or in the decline stage is to refresh your product, maybe adding some innovations to it that then allows you to relaunch it as a new product. So that certainly can be helpful. All right. There's a process for developing a strategy and for implementing that strategy. So how do we go about developing a strategy within an organization? So the first thing that you want to do is to understand the environment within which you operate, and then determine the extent to which you have strengths and weaknesses in the context of that environment. What are some of the opportunities that may present itself due to changes in technology, due to changes in political climate, due to changes in the economy, and then sometimes given industrial changes or legal changes, there could be some threats to the organization that you're working with, where there might be new laws that make it very difficult for you to continue to manufacture or produce a product or service in the way that you are used to doing it, in which case you may now have to make some major changes. All right? And so analyzing your environment is extremely important, and understanding where your organization is positioned within that environment will help you begin to put in place a set of objectives that the organization should have as part of its strategy. Then you want to explore or re-examine your mission. Now it says determine the mission, but the reality is that when people, when companies develop, you don't do an environmental scan first. You usually create a new organization in response to some need that you've identified, and then you decide what your purpose is going to be. And then after you've decided what your purpose is going to be, then in that context you look at the environment and determine the extent to which your company, your organization can meet its purpose in that environment without doing anything. But if it cannot meet its purpose in that environment, it has to understand what its weaknesses are, what its strengths are, and what are the factors that is going to impact its operations. So once the mission and the vision are articulated, the environmental scan is important data that allows you to position the organization. But at the same time, as you are understanding the environment, it is possible to identify other needs that you may want to take on board, in which case your mission can be expanded, right? Or your mission can change if the purpose that you were focusing on is no longer a critical issue anymore. So those things can happen. And then, of course, once you've determined what your core purpose is going to be and affirm that, and you understand where you are in the environment that you're operating in, then you could put together a strategy. And what is that strategy? That strategy will be articulated in terms of you saying what performance advantages that you want to achieve, right? So you have to understand what performance advantage, right? So your mission and your vision are important here, the performance advantage, and then this is where now we create the ops strategy, right? But that part right here will then become part of your corporate strategy. Okay? So then you'll determine if you want to emphasize a low price, flexibility, quick response, dependability, and so on. And then what will happen is that your operations infrastructure will then support that. Your product design, your supply chain, your inventory management, your process design, etc. Okay? So we did say, in terms of strategy development, identify your key success factors, build the staff and staff the organization, integrate OM with other activities. Now, what do we mean by that? Essentially, what we're talking about is the idea that the operation strategy have to be aligned to the performance advantage that the organization or the company is looking for. All right, and then to be able to do that, you need to identify what are the key success factors. What are the factors in operations that would allow you to achieve that performance advantage? So if we're talking about cost advantage, well, what are the critical factors? Well, we need to be able to produce at a very low cost, which means we need to be able to find supplies at a low cost, which means that we have to have a process that's not very expensive. We need to be able to manage inventory to minimize waste. We need to be able to define quality in a way that that quality level is achievable without some complex sort of a production process. We need to find a process option that allows us to achieve that cost advantage. In other words, you don't want an expensive automated process if you could do things much more cheaply, or you may use an automated process if the cost of human intervention is much higher, in which case then you say automation might help you lower your costs. But remember that consideration that I want you to have is balancing how much we use technology without overly displacing people, because ultimately this world is about people, not about products and services. The products and services are there to meet the needs of people, and if people are unemployed, then they cannot purchase those goods and services. I think we tend to forget that when private companies search for advantages that leverage technology so much to the extent that they now make a large portion of their staff members redundant, only to try to sell them the same products and services that they are producing, which is crazy. Okay? So the key success factors are essentially the types of capabilities that you need to have internally. And when it comes to having a corporate strategy, it needs to be supported by your marketing function. So marketing will have to have its key success factors. It needs to be supported by finance. So it has to have its key success factors, and it needs to be supported by operations, where it has its key success factors down here. So things like, do we make a customized product or a standardized product? Do we have the capabilities to produce the standardized product or the customized, depending on what is needed, right? How do we define quality? And can we actually achieve quality based on the definition that we use? So these are questions that you will need to ask, all right? Now, in an organization, clearly at the heart of it is a system. And then what is a system? A system is a number of interacting parts, right? So they interact with each other. Finance interacts with marketing, interacts with operations, and so on. So we have to keep in mind that as we are attempting to get the kind of performance that we're looking for, we have to look at the various areas, and we have to make sure that they're fully integrated. So if we're talking about marketing, talking about finance and accounting, ops, and so on, and then when we now go to operations and we take the 10 decision areas of OM, they also have to interact with each other, right? So if we're talking about product design, inventory management, scheduling, process strategy, so these have to interact with each other as well. So as they interact with each other, they must also integrate. So you cannot consider your process design in isolation from your product design, because your product design will have implications for the process that you use. If you're going to mass produce a product, you're going to need a process that allows you to be able to produce high volumes, and then that allows you to get the low cost that you're looking for. So integrating OM with other activities. So here's an example that show for an airline, Porter Airlines. So it has a standardized fleet of Bombardier Q400. These are essentially Dash 8s. And then it then tries to produce, and then it does short haul flights, frequent reliable schedules, high aircraft utilization, and lean productive staffing policy. So these things sort of mutually enforce each other. By having short haul flights, then you have a situation where you can maximize utilization. Also, high aircraft utilization lowers your costs, which allows you to then be able to sell your tickets cheaper. Having productive employees and small crews of employees or lean employees who are very productive, then again you keep your staffing costs down, right? You have frequent reliable schedules, which then helps to maximize utilization of your equipment, which is your aircraft, right? So these things sort of mutually reinforce each other. And so this map is called an activity map that shows how these parts reinforce each other. Okay. So in terms of strategic planning, core competencies in outsourcing, these are considerations as well in operation strategy. We've already talked about the role of corporate strategy. That's where strategic planning comes in. But when we're talking about an operation strategy, it is really a strategic planning process, but at the level of operations. And there are a number of steps that you take to develop a strategic plan. The same way you talk about doing an environmental scan, where you're going to have to do an internal scan. The same way you're going to have to identify corporate objectives, You have to identify operational objectives, and then your initiatives that you will undertake to achieve the operational objectives will be initiatives that are linked to those 10 decision areas of ON. So that's what helps you get a strategic plan for operations, which we call an operation strategy. Core competencies, what the organizations do as well as or better than their competitors. Outsourcing, transferring activities that have been traditionally internal to external suppliers. And the idea is really to give your company focus on the things you can do well. And the things you cannot do so well, it allows others to do that at a price. Okay, so it contracts that out. And so if outsourcing is a tool that can be used, and it has its advantages and disadvantages. So we could see that sometimes it could cause cost savings, gain outside expertise, improve operations and service, maintain a focus on what your core competencies are, and then you have access to technology that you don't currently have outside. However, it can increase logistics and inventory costs, loss of control, because you now have to rely on a third party to do certain things for you. You might end up creating your own competition, because the fact that this organization is producing a service for you, it may very well decide to scale that service and compete with you. All right? So these are some things to consider. And in terms of global operations strategy, the idea that companies want to globalize have to also think about what the operation strategy is going to be in that context. So having a global strategy might, have implications for standardization of your products, because then it allows you to scale across international boundaries. A good example of that would be McDonald's. McDonald's in France, in Britain, in the US, and so on, have fairly similar products and similar tastes, because the products have been standardized. And so as a result, you could scale them. So you get economies of scale, and then you may have to do some tweaking in terms of different cultures and so on. Okay? Then there is a transnational strategy, and there is the international strategy and the multi-domestic strategy. So each of these strategies have their strengths and weaknesses. And so in terms of the international strategy, you essentially, what you're doing is you basically function on an import-export license. The idea is that you don't necessarily go and set up factories in different jurisdictions. What you do is you're producing a product in one location, and then you are exporting or importing the product. So that's called an international strategy. A transnational strategy allows for the movement of people, material, and ideas across boundaries. You get economies of scale, and then you have cross-cultural learning. So the idea is that you don't necessarily have to have a standardized product, but what it is that you would optimize your operations in each location based on how you intend to create advantage for your organization. And then the multi-domestic strategy is one where you are franchising. So you're using an existing domestic model, but then you are exporting it globally. So you're franchising, joint ventures, subsidiaries, and so on. So I guess Heinz, McDonald's, Hard Rock Cafe, these are examples of multi-domestic. So it's a domestic product that is then franchised. Whereas in your transnational strategy, you may very well customize the product for your different markets that you're operating in. Okay? So global operations provide challenges and opportunities. Organizations identify the strengths and weaknesses. The mission and the vision allows the organization to determine what its performance objectives are, and those performance objectives have to be supported by the operations architecture. That operations architecture has 10 decision areas that you will configure to be able to give you the leverage that you need to achieve those performance objectives. And operations managers can impact corporate strategy and corporate performance because they have a major influence on the design of the operations infrastructure. So here's an activity for you, picking the very same organization that you did in the previous activity. We want you to now look at the mission statement, identify what would be key performance priorities for those organizations, and then what role the 10 decision areas of OM would play in supporting those performance priorities. All right, so that is your task, and let's see how well you are able to take the concept of operations strategy and apply it to a not-for-profit organization, a humanitarian organization, or a small to medium-sized enterprise. That's the end of our chapter 2 on operations strategy.